Lore Together is proud to be part of the Boss Rush Games Network. Feel free to find out more at bossrushgames.com/network. Hi, I'm Sapphy.
And I'm Mystic.
And this is Lore Together. This is the podcast where husband and wife team go over all the world building, storytelling, and characters of video games. Because it's what we like to do together. We lore together.
Yep, and this is episode 75.
Woohoo!
It's taken a while.
Yeah.
Before we get into the episode, if you'd like to contact us, you can do that on Instagram at Lore Together, on Twitter at Lore Together, through email at loretogether@gmail.com, through Reddit at LoreTogetherPod.
Yeah, are you getting back to that, Mystic?
I will get back to that. Yeah.
It just seems prudent to diversify.
Yes. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that over on patreon.com/LoreTogether, where you can pay a per episode pledge to get early access to episodes as well as exclusive content on all that fun stuff. And if you also want to support the podcast but can't do it monetarily, you can go to where you're listening and give us a 5-star rating. It helps us out a lot.
Thanks so much for everybody who's rated us so far. And we look forward to earning some more 5-star reviews. Yay!
Now, I'm not in the hot seat.
I wouldn't even call it the hot seat. I don't feel, whenever I'm doing the research and explaining it, it doesn't feel that hot. I'm actually much more excited to talk about it.
I like talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird not knowing what we're talking about. I know we're talking about Dragon Age, but that's all I know.
Yes, we are talking about Dragon Age. So
this is like BioWare.
Yes. Back-to-back BioWare. Yeah. I wanted to do it because the last time we talked about Dragon Age was literally around Dragon Age Day. And this next episode is going to come up right before Dragon Age Day. So feel free to save it to listen to on the actual day, or just think of it as like a little hors d'oeuvre before all the awesome fan Dragon Age Day content on December 4th.
And hopefully news about the next Dragon Age.
Oh, we hope so. And in fact, that is part of the inspiration of today's episode, because it is once again a theory.
Oh, no.
A game theory.
Oh, no.
Without me having to take a test on it like I did in college. Actually, around the time we first started dating was my senior year in college, and I did have to take a game theory test. And Mystic did see me break down when I saw what my score was on that test. I did not do well. It's
been a while since that happened, so I don't remember that at all.
It was one of those things where like I really was into the topic, but I don't think the professor taught in a way that was good for me. But, and I wouldn't even say that necessarily made him a bad professor. Moving on. So we're talking about Dragon Age theory, and we'll be talking about some things that first we're going to explain essentially the parts of Thedas that we need to know about before I can get into my theory for what's going to come up in Dragon Age 4, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, also known as Dad. Episode Dad Hype.
So weird.
I mean, yeah, it is weird, but I think they knew what they were doing with that. So we're gonna talk about, if you're a fan of Dragon Age and you've been keeping up with the stuff, we're gonna talk about some stuff that's not very surprising to you, and we'll probably talk about a theory that you may have seen floating around before, partly because I've actually talked about it years prior.
So the last theory you did, which I believe was on Lyrium and Mythal.
Yes, that one specifically, yeah.
Is like in our top 10 most listened to episodes. And that was back when mini episodes were still... No, it wasn't a mini episode. Never mind.
It was a mini episode.
It was?
Yes, we just released it. That was a mini episode at the time we released it, because this was early on of our Patreon structuring.
Yeah.
Now mini episodes stay exclusively to the patrons, like our Keith David episode.
Yes.
And things like that. And
we have another one coming soon.
I know we understand we've been saying that forever, but like honestly, things are a little bit better right now to be able to release that stuff. And we had an idea fall into our laps out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So, And actually, Eremithius, don't tell anybody what it is, because I did tell you what I was looking at. So, anyway, so we're going to start right off with some concepts, and then we'll get into my theory, the thesis of the episode. So I'm sorry to not have it just plainly out in front of you at the beginning of the episode per usual, but I hope you guys are willing to go on this ride with me. And then afterwards, let me know what you think, what you don't think. And when Dragon Age 4 comes out, we'll know how right or wrong I am.
Okay, Nostradamus, let's go.
So first, we're going to actually talk about the Veil.
Okay.
But not exactly about the Veil. But we're going to start off with some steps we have to go through to understand what the Veil is and why it exists. And I'm sure there's a lot of fans that are like, well, of course she's talking about the Veil. So before we talk about the Veil...
My understanding of the Veil kind of stops at like the Dragon Age 1 understanding of the Veil.
Which is fine. We're going to...
I know there's more of it in Inquisition, but I don't remember it that well. My vague understanding of it is realm of demons, realm of demons and dreams and all that stuff.
I think you're mixing up some stuff. So
awesome. This is great. I'm already wrong.
Yeah. So first we're going to talk about the Fade. The Fade is not of Thedas, but exists in the same place. It is at the same time separate from the mortal realm that the races of Thedas reside in, but also layered over it, and occasionally overlaps and crosses over. As someone who's played Dungeons and Dragons, think of it similar to the material plane and the ethereal plane. Okay, I thought that would help Mystic, but he's giving me this look like he doesn't understand. For those of you who play D&D, I hope that helps.
It helps me, but I'm still not 100% remembering the difference between... Like, as soon as you said the Fade, I was like, oh, I'm so getting mistaken.
Yeah.
But the Veil is like the border.
Yeah,
is my understanding.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So the Fade itself is a layer of existence that most mortals will not experience outside of entering it in their dreams. Specifically in dreams, mortals merely witness part of the Fade, but unless powerful mages will not have any control over it. The only exception are the dwarves who don't dream and don't produce mages. All other mortals who are mages are believed to have a heightened connection with the Fade. This is a dangerous connection to have, at least to some, because the Fade is also where spirits and demons reside. And specifically demons are willing to possess a person in order to enact their will on Thedas, the material plane. There's a lot more to it, including ways to physically enter the Fade and the logic of it. But this is just a general overview of understanding what the Fade is and how a layperson in Thedas would probably have an understanding of it.
So it's another plane of existence.
Yes.
That kind of butts up against the, quote, real world.
Mm-hmm.
And the border between them can be distinct, thin, torn, all that stuff.
So the Veil is the metaphysical barrier that keeps the Fade separate from Thedas and mortal existence.
Okay.
It's not something you can locate. It's more like gravity in the sense that it works like a theory that's been proven with multiple observations over generations. So you can't just point to a place and say, hey, look, it's the Veil. But you can point to a place and say, oh, look, there's a tear in the Veil. Oh, the Veil must be weak here. There's ways you can observe Thedas and know that the Veil is a property to be understood on Thedas.
It reminds me a little bit, when you describe it like that, of the luminiferous ether. If you're unfamiliar, this is how we get a lot of... It's very fantastical. It's kind of how we explained how the universe worked before we understood particle physics and quantum physics.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was kind of like, oh, it's everywhere. And
right.
Sound and light and everything make waves in this because they're all physical things.
Yeah.
And it gets weird. It gets kind of oogie boogie. But
this is less Oogie Boogie in Thedas because this is so much more provable. Hence why I relate it to gravity.
Right, but the idea is kind of like, it would be kind of like trying to explain the borders between the third and the fourth dimension. You know, it's like...
But that's not how dimensions work.
All right, fine.
Like, you're talking about... The fourth dimension is time, sir. That's what you're talking about.
Fine. Ignore me. I'm being dumb. I'm trying to explain something that Sapphy's already going to explain, so I'm just going to stop trying to explain things.
Right. You're trying to take back your old position because it's been that long since we've switched seats, and I understand. You're very used to it, and I'm here to let you know that you can rest now. It's okay.
Okay.
So, the veil prevents demons from stomping around all over the place and everyone being able to use magic at will all the time. It is specifically what is torn in the beginning of Dragon Age Inquisition. Tears in the veil typically happen when the area in a mortal realm has experienced a large amount of death or a high use of magic. This probably explains why it took an act of magic terrorism to create the breach that literally starts Inquisition. So, that's one of the best ways to prove that the veil exists, where it ends up tearing. Because that's where you have more instances of spirits and demons, you know, which, depending on who you talk to, can be one and the same. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
It is a demon.
Right. It's specifically proof that exists because it is thinner there. It is less strong there. So spirits are attracted to dead bodies, and that's why where death happens. And of course, magic is pulling through the fade, so that way mages can bring forth their will. So that's part of the reason why it proves its existence when you essentially start making it weaker.
Okay.
I think another way to think of it, now that I speak on it, is, you know, if you had an invisibility cloak similar to the one known in Harry Potter, and you would only really know say you hung it up on a coat rack, and you never really saw it until, you know, you started, like, rubbing at it and wearing away, and it got thinner and thinner, and suddenly you're like, why is there a hole where there shouldn't be a hole? That's kind of the veil.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm. I can poke a hole through something that I can't see. So that's kind of how the veil works. With the separation of, I'm calling it the mortal realm, and that's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons terms, but the material world is how a lot of the text regarding Dragon Age talks about
that would be
the mortal realm,
because they call it the material plane.
Yes.
In Dungeons and Dragons.
In Dungeons and Dragons. So it's the material world, but also I like calling it the mortal realm because at this point, what we understand to be mortal beings primarily exist on the material world. So with this separation of the mortal realm from the Fade, there are religious theories throughout Thedas that explain its existence. For this episode, and again, unsurprisingly for fans of the series, let's focus on the Elven belief. First is an overview of who is in the Pantheon, and then how it relates to the veil. So, I also want to say very quickly that sometimes I'll refer to the elves as the Elven. In the Elven language, Elven is literally the phrase for the people. So, it sometimes just is easier to write. So that's why I did it.
So the funny thing is, after doing all this time working on all these different universes and all this stuff, especially when it comes to like these big franchises we cover.
Yeah.
My brain still just always like my brain still wants to like interject the El Nofe from Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
It's just
not, but
it's not. And it can't be because of how the universes are so distinctly created.
But there is like some weird commonality almost in my brain for some reason between those two, at my understanding of it, and I know that it's not related at all, but my brain can't distinguish those words sometimes. I really want to caution thinking about it like that, because just knowing how... Oh no, I know I'm wrong. Yeah, okay, good. Great. Awesome. And so the audience knows that you're wrong too. We just had to say that out loud. Unfortunately. I know I'm wrong. Yeah. Because they're just not similar enough to me to want to really compare.
If anything, I would think that the elves of the Dragon Age, to a certain extent, have a lot of the same issues that elves in the Tolkien universe do. It's, it's kind of a twist on some of the same problems that if you read the expanded if you don't just read the Lord of the Rings, if you read, like, I forget some of the extra books that Tolkien wrote that a lot of the super fans know about, and I would mispronounce right now, so I'm not going to do it. But there's a lot of the same issues once you start realizing the depths of the lore. So let's move on to the Elven Pantheon. It is mostly revered in Dalish culture, where elves are able to retain as much of their original traditions and customs as possible without constant pressure from humanity's chantry or the rigors of the Kun. It consists of 8 gods in total, starting with Methal, goddess of motherhood and justice, and Elgarnan, god of fatherhood and vengeance. Their children include Falandin, the friend of the dead, his twin brother Dirthamin, who gave the elves knowledge and family values, Andrul, the goddess of the hunt, Selaise, the hearthkeeper who taught elves about herbs, threads, and magic, and June, the god of craft. Andrul chose one of her followers, Gillanane, to become a goddess over the Hala, a deer-like species found in many of the forests in Thedas. These gods are said to have watched over the people and have warred with evil gods that are simply referred to as the Forgotten Ones. These gods were rulers over the domains of terror, malice, spite, and pestilence. In the middle was the trickster god Fenharel, who would speak with both sets of gods freely, occasionally favoring one pantheon over another, the subject of a few Dalish fables. It is said that Fenharel wanted the realms of Thedas at a time called Elvenan, where the people live, all to himself. He tricked the elven gods, along with the Forgotten Ones, with the promise of a truce, and with that he sealed the gods away. The Forgotten Ones are said to be locked up in their home realm of the Void, also known as the Abyss. It is literally a land of nothingness, and is also rumored to actually bring elven gods to madness when they tried to venture through it to hunt down the Forgotten Ones. The 8 elven gods were locked away in the Eternal City, a place that is found in their old domain of the Beyond, also known as the Fade.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
All right. Yeah, sorry.
I love how there is an elven pantheon of which I have heard of one deity.
You've heard of all of them in theory.
I personally do not remember.
You have not retained it. That's fine. Yeah. You don't have to.
Also, I don't play elven characters usually in Dragon Age.
Yeah.
And then you have evil gods.
Yes.
Which I thought Fenharel was part of the pantheon, but no, Fenharel is not part of the pantheon. Fenharel is part of a different group. I didn't even know that part.
He's part of... So the part about Fenharel, the reason he's a trickster god, is that, especially in a lot of these Dalish fables, he can play both sides. He can walk among the high elven gods of good who work with the people, but he can also walk with the Forgotten Ones who are against the elven gods.
And then you have an abyss, which I wasn't aware of.
The Void and the Abyss, it's just a place of nothingness. And it's also referenced partly by the Chantry as well. So there's a little bit of like cultural overlap of like that is a place that is metaphysically somewhere. And it is apparently something that like the maker used to set aside, if I remember correctly. I didn't really study that right now, obviously.
I need to pay more attention. The funny thing is I like deep diving into the lore of games. I'm going to break the whole podcast now. I like deep diving into the lore of games, but when I'm in the middle of the story of the game...
No, you're not paying attention to it.
I don't pay attention to it, and I don't retain it usually. Like
I don't think there's anything wrong with having universes that you gravitate more to. Like, I talked to a friend who, like, we talked about how we're both huge sci-fi fans. But he was like, for me, my fantasy universe is the Lord of the Rings. I don't care about learning about the rules about any other fantasy universe because every fantasy universe has heck of rules and history that you have to remember. And for me, I said, yeah, the way you, and when this is around the same time you started getting me the volumes of the World of Thedas, and I was starting to get more into the books and stuff, and at that time I said, like, how you feel about Lord of the Rings is how I feel about Dragon Age, like how it's built, how it's created, what it's, like, what the foundations of it are. Yeah. That is what excites me, that same level, and after that, mostly just give me sci-fi or dystopians. Like, that's my jam.
Yeah, as much as I do like Dragon Age, and I do like Dragon Age, but my understanding is very much just the story of the game.
Right.
And
I think for most people who play the games, that's what they understand, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that level of understanding.
Right, but of course when we get to Elder Scrolls, I've bought the books from the games.
Is boughten a word?
I think so.
Okay.
I have acquired the books from the games.
Yes, you have.
Which is a weird thing to buy, considering it's all freely available online, but it's nice to have it bound and everything.
I understand, yeah. No, I'm not...
But even then, like, as much as I like that universe, there are people who go deeper than I have at this point. One of them is our patron.
Yeah, there are whole podcasts that have deep dived into the universe.
Please check the podcast Written in Uncertainty if you want to check more Elder Scrolls.
You want a deep dive. They dive deep. They're going down, down, down to where the giant squid are in that universe. They dive deep. But
giant squid, that's Mass Effect.
Shush you. Anyway. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with just knowing what you like and what you don't like, and
right.
And learning stuff. We've both been in this seat where we've learned things we didn't realize that we missed in the game, and how exciting it is. I mean,
look, I've already found out that character I thought I knew, who we all thought we knew, but didn't.
Yeah.
But a character I thought I knew on a deeper level, I was still wrong about. So we're all good. Like, I'm still learning stuff.
Yeah, I exactly. So for the Fade is considered a holy place where the elven gods once walked freely, but are now trapped thanks to the deception of Fen'Harel. During Dragon Age...
Did it...
Wait, okay, well, yeah?
Was the Fade still, like, demons and everything, and spirits, or was it, like, more amiable then?
So there's this idea that when Fen'Harel locked the gods away, there was nobody to tend to it. So that... And the idea of demons, I don't think is... The idea of demons in the Chantry, which is the main religion that you encounter through Dragon Age, is also, the idea of demons is kind of there to control the mage population.
Right.
Because that religion was developed at a time to counter a mageocracy.
Yes. My understanding was, okay, so they're not demons in the Fade because...
in theory,
because quoting Inquisition, if I remember vaguely, it is said that when spirits are pulled through the Fade, they can't understand this world, and so they become twisted and demons.
We're told that by a specific character, and I will explain more of this later. So
okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to extrapolate on. This is one of those episodes where I feel like we will talk a lot more about extra things as it goes on because there's so much to pull from.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that's definitely a theory of it. When you do the mage harrowing at the beginning of Dragon Age Origins, if you decide to play a mage, it is assumed that you are going to encounter a demon in the Fade regardless. They don't call it a spirit, they just call it a demon. And even though spirits are a thing that exist, it's assumed that most of the time if anything through the Fade's going to touch a mage, it's going to be a demon, and it's going to be there to trick you so that it can enact its will in the material plane and cause chaos and destruction. That's the assumption. Okay. And so you're assuming that everything you encounter in the Fade is a potential demon. But
the elven gods kind of tended the Fade, is what you're saying.
Yeah, until they got locked away, essentially. So during Dragon Age, and one thing I will remind everybody if you're not aware of, the game's called Dragon Age because that's literally the era that they live in. The Chantry names the ages based on different things, like there's the Exalted Age and stuff. And it was literally named Dragon Age because they thought dragons had died off, and then literally at the end of the previous age, there was a sighting of a dragon when basically Ferelden gained its independence from Orlais again. And so the Chantry decided to name it the Dragon Age. So that's part of the reason why it's called Dragon Age. So during the Dragon Age, where your characters are living in, elves don't believe their gods can touch or influence them directly, but do believe that if they pass the veil and enter the Fade, they are in a holy place that only can be navigated adeptly by the gods that are now sealed away.
Okay. Sorry for that little chuckle there, too. When you were mentioning the names in the name of the age and stuff, I just chuckled because of Thedas being named what it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of... Yes, exactly. We've gone over that before.
Thedas is called Thedas because it's the
Dragon Age setting. Yes. So. There you go. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
No, it works.
This is the time where I warn you that we're getting into heavy spoilers territory. If you haven't played Inquisition or its most vital DLC, Trespasser, and you do want to be surprised by those endings, stop listening now and come back after you've completed those stories. I know the game is quote-unquote old, so I don't have to give this warning, but I'm doing it anyway. Like, it's been out for, better part of a decade?
I think so, yeah. It doesn't seem like it's been that long sometimes, but... So, yeah.
So just know, going forward, we're now getting into some serious spoiler territory that was like a big deal when specifically Trespasser came out. A lot of things were verified. So, moving on, let's get right to it. In Inquisition, you unknowingly have an elven god as your companion. Specifically, Solus is the newly awoken Fen'Haral. His guise of traveling apostate who knows all this elven history should have been suspicious when you saw he did not carry the Valisleen or the tattoos of the gods on his face. His bare face, indicating he's not Dalish. If he wasn't learning about elven history from the Dalish, where was he getting his history? So...
Really?
Let's think about this. First of all, he also complains that other elves have called him flat ear because he's not elf-ish enough. Like, and I have to assume it's Dalish basically, giving him grief because of the fact that he doesn't seem to be of the people, Elven.
I get all of that, but like his explanation in game of being like having learned how to travel the Fade and even like rest in historic sites in ruins and stuff and learn the history, it doesn't strike me as implausible either. Okay, so this is where I'm really gonna tear you a new one for saying that. So in Dragon Age 2, we meet the half-elf Fen'Riel. Fen'Riel is a dreamer who can do what you're talking about. I should have played more Dragon Age 2, I feel.
I literally talked about this when we guested on the Boss Rush podcast, and you were talking about like characters we connected to on a level in the game. Fen'Riel was the one I was talking about because he's a character who's trying to navigate who to be when he feels like he's stuck between two identities. And he basically chooses the third option of, it doesn't matter, I get to be what I want to be. I'm going to Tevinter and I'm going to be a Dreamer Mage. So, his mother had originally like sent him to the Dalish because the Dalish know how to do the dreaming gift.
Mm-hmm.
Mages in the Chantry don't know how to do that, and they don't want you to do that because you might get possessed. So, logically, let's think about this. We have an elven mage who's not Dalish. So the Dalish didn't teach him what they retain of the old ways. He's not of the Chantry because he would be tranquil. And he's not of Tevinter because if he was of Tevinter, everything he'd want to do, he could do over there. He would not have come over to Thedas.
Okay. All
so
right.
You should have been very suspicious of this barefaced elven knowledge-carrying elf from the get-go with everything the game taught you. And honestly, some of us were not. We really honestly weren't. We saw that bald head and we thought he was very cute and we just fell for it, okay?
I think it's just that my understanding of Dragon Age is so, as I'm playing, is so surface.
Right.
I accepted his explanation at face value, bare-face value, as you would.
Bare-face value. Well, and to be honest, so there's a couple things, like this unknowingly, there's a pattern also of not trusting the bald elf, because in Dragon Age Origins, the keeper that you meet, Zarathan, played by Tim Russ, awesomely, basically has a big secret. Here's another spoilers, but we're in spoilers territory now. He made werewolves to get revenge on the human people that were bothering his people. His clan.
Yeah.
So he made them werewolves, and that's the secret. He made a deal with a spirit and made these werewolves, and that's why the werewolves keep fighting and trying to turn his clan into other werewolves. So bald elves in general just get a bad rap in Dragon Age storytelling. Just in general.
All right, now I'm going to go play Inquisition, make a bald elf.
Be best friends with Solus.
No, they're not going to ask him anything.
Oh my gosh. You just
I will never
him.
ask him his opinion. I will never until we get to Cole.
So, yeah.
That's the only time I like Solus.
Yeah. Solus will admit he wasn't really that much of a god, just a powerful mage. He will then elaborate that the elven gods, who he knew from eons ago, were not actually gods either. They are just powerful mages who gained prominence by waging war against the titans of the material world. I won't go too deep on what the titans are in this episode, but I did talk about them in a mini episode we released in October of 2020. Scroll down to between episodes 20 and 21 of our show to listen and gain some insight on the titans themselves. After the war for the material world was won, the Evanuris gained prominence to the point where they evolved from elders to kings to finally gods. This led to an elven civilization where the Evanuris ruled by centralizing their powers. They created the foci for their magic. They claimed it was sacrilege for anyone but them to obtain winged forms, and used their magic to enslave their fellow elves and brand them with the Valisleen. There were some elves who then retreated into the void in order to not have the will of the Evanuris forced upon them. They were mostly forgotten by the rest of the Elvenon, the empire of the Elven. The Evanuris did have favored ones, a noble class of sorts, who pledged allegiance to one of these self-appointed gods and was allowed to have slaves. With this hierarchy, the great cities, including the legendary Arlathan, were built. So it comes up a lot. Arlathan is told to be this great city, and a lot of the Dalish like to talk about how it was just a magical place where everything was perfect and beautiful. And Arlathan really was just a capital city and essentially an elven magocracy when you think about it. But it was kind of a theocratic magocracy rather than Tevinter, where they have there's a bit of a idea of lineage and a little bit of meritocracy mixed into their magocracy.
Right.
Not a lot, but yeah.
Tevinter's interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to get to know it a lot better with Dragon Age 4. But also, during this time, there were great interdimensional spaces, such as the Crossroads, which allowed elves to pass through the Alluvians, which if you don't know what Alluvian is, it's a mirror doorway. And for those of you who played Inquisition, it's what Morrigan introduces to the Inquisitor, where it's essentially this mostly abandoned, forgotten place of Alluvians that you can walk through and go to other places.
Right. Reminds me a bit of the Iconians from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
just
interdimensional
doorways that lead to different places. Yeah.
Yes. It's kind of like that. With these grand creations, there were also petty disputes between the Evanuris, resulting in battles and wars between them. Now, one thing I want to highlight is that the elves were immortal at this point, but you could still die if you died in battle. And a lot of the Evanuris were having their subjects fight to the death for them, wages wars for them, have them go on these, a lot of this kind of stuff.
Sounds wasteful.
The found texts suggest that Mythal was the most even keel and kind at the time and was the one to dispense justice. She would suggest ways to prevent civil wars amongst the Evanuris, and Solus in particular speaks highly of her as the one who actually cared for her people. Like, she did not expect complete sovereignty. That's the claim.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
An aeon after the Evanurus defeat the Titans, it was discovered that this war had unleashed something horrible and dangerous beneath the surface. Elves hastily sealed up any tunnels and corridors leading underground. Figuring out that this horrible thing was unleashed due to the carelessness of the Evanurus, the sparks of rebellion began. Solus was a friend of Mythal, had been falsely named a god, and had connections to the elves who had retreated to the void at this time. He began a campaign of undermining the divinity claims of the Evanurus. The name Dreadwolf, or in Elven, Fenharal, was given to him as an insult. He instead wore the title as a badge of honor and then began going on as that name as he helped elves escape slavery. This began a gruesome war where elves fought against their masters using any means possible. Some of the text talks about how alluvians had to be sealed off to prevent enemies being able to come through, but servants were stuck in the crossroads and ended up starving and dying there. There's also a process called Uthenera, where prominent magically powerful elves would go into a deep slumber to wake up centuries later, and they would have servants tend to them and wash them and make sure that they were all right. It's almost kind of like vampire lore.
I was gonna say sense. It sounds and sounds like Serana waking up and not knowing the century you're in because it's been, of course she was just in a tomb, but
and during these rebellions, those that were in Uthenera were essentially killed in their sleep. Slaughtered in their sleep.
Okay. Easy target.
Very brutal time. And it sounds like those. It's funny because in Dragon Age Origins you can find a tomb of the elves who went through Uthenera, and that there's a lot of reverence put into like the texts you find about, these were elves that were thought to sleep and dream and to be, as elders, and then they would wake up when the time was right, to return and bring their knowledge because they were immortal, they would take a long rest and they would come back. And it was this idea of like, you don't really die, but you do need to take a break. And, there's this like almost this reverence for the practice. And when you start figuring out what, how Elvenon really was, there's this idea that it was only really something that the mages in power, the Evanurus, and their nobles were able to afford to do because somebody had to take care of them while they were in Uthenera.
That sounds familiar to humans.
Yeah, exactly. The whole time, Mythal was aware of what Solus was doing, and while none of the currently given texts I've seen confirms this, it's possible it made her a liability. The Evanurus murdered her. Solus decided the best reaction to this was to seal them away and keep them from their power.
Now, you keep saying Solus. Is Solus actually like the entity we know as Solus? Is that physically who is Fenharal back then?
Yes.
So Fenharal is not Solus is not a reincarnation of whatever.
There's no reference of reincarnation when it comes to Solus.
Or the latest vessel or whatever.
Correct. Solus is the OG Fenharal.
That changes my understanding a lot.
Okay.
I thought
I didn't realize you missed that.
I thought he was just the latest vessel for that spirit or whatever.
No. I think you're mixing that up. I'll explain it after I get through my text, but I think I know what you're mixing that up with. Solus used what power he could to seal the Evanurus away from harming the rest of elven kind. This is what created the Veil. This is truly why the Veil was created and how it was created. In his success, he separated the Fade from easy access to the rest of the Elven, who were all now stuck on the material world. This lost connection caused the once immortal elves to age and lose access to all the powers that had built all of their great empire on the material world. Solus had fallen into a great slumber after having created the veil due to the immense power manifested in order to create it. Because of that, he missed generations of Elven first mourning and then forgetting the immense power and reach of their civilization. They had won the war against the original enslavers, and after some time gained new ones as humans migrated to Thedas and established the Vinter Imperium, who brought down the grand city of Arlathan and continued through to the Dragon Age itself to enslave elves. To speak a bit on how that tragic history happened, the old humans, who are said to cross from Parvolan to reach Thedas and began interacting with the elves, were known as Neurominians. It was said for a time that humans and elves traded with each other and were peaceful, but soon elves tried to limit contact with humans, who called them quicklings, or Shemlin is the actual term that's used in Elven language.
Mm-hmm.
By this point, elves theorized that the arrival of humans was the reason that they began to age and die, meaning they had lost the knowledge of what had happened with the forming of the veil, assuming the Elven as a whole knew what Solus had done in full. I don't know that. I don't know if there's anywhere in the text that would allude to how many of the Elven knew what Solus did before he did it.
Okay.
So, it is said about 300 years after humans arrived on Thedas, some Neurominians heard the call of the old gods and taught them magic. The mages who harnessed this magic would become rulers, and 4 kingdoms would form. Over the centuries, the worship of these old gods continued, seen and imagined as great dragon creatures. These 4 kingdoms finally unified under the one banner of the Tevinter Imperium. The worship...
Really?
Yes. So where Tevinter is where humanity first touched Thedas, and then spread from there.
Okay. All right.
Mystic is... I'm like blowing Mystic's mind. He knew exactly the game I was talking about, and he is still like... There's like 3 times now already in this episode where I've looked at you and you're like, giving a face of like, really?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't even know what to say beyond. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah. The worship of the old gods continued, which the Chantry refers to as the first sin of humanity. So I can get into a little bit, but the Chantry is kind of like an answer to what happened with the old gods. We're going to talk about what happened with the old gods. But because of that, a lot of current human history is humans' understanding of this history is through the Chantry, the Andrastean Chantry. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The Andrastean Chantry, which is at the most basic level, just gender swap Christianity. At the most basic level.
I would caution that. And if anything, I would think, to be honest, if we're going to talk a comparison between Elder Scrolls and Dragon Age, I would say that Talos has a lot more in common with Andraste than Christ does.
Okay, drawing a comparison I wasn't ready for. All right.
Yeah. She was of political power and might when she began to claim that she started to hear the words of the Maker. And she was part of a political revolution, whereas Christ, as worshipped in modern Christianity, is much more of a peacekeeper and like a leader of philosophical and ethical people who are thinking about how to live, not not waging war.
Here's what bugs me right now.
Yeah.
I had no idea that Andraste is part of a political thing either. So I am completely out of my depth in Dragon
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is also a good... I'm going to plug one of our friends. They're not a part of the Boss Rush Network, but they're awesome. Dragon Age Lorecast, actually. We became podcast friends because last year we both ended up doing episodes on Varric Tethras by accident, and
the same week.
Well, because it was around Dragon Age Day. They did their Dragon Age Day thing on Varric, and we did it as well. And we ended up covering different things. So if you listened to both, you ended up getting like two different sides of Varric. It was very cool. And so we ended up, like, I'm on their Discord. Like, to make a long story short, I totally visit their Discord and, like, talk with them and everything. And they have, the great thing about being friends with them is the Dragon Age Lorecast. You just listen to it, and it'll have things like, if you want specifically a deep dive on the Chantry, they have that as one of their episodes. And they're going through and they're doing a lot of episodes like that that's specifically Dragon Age lore based. Mm-hmm. So if you want to find out more, they cover it.
But then I spoil future episodes for you, so.
Well, I'm trying to do stuff in a way that's not going to, step on their toes. So.
But the more I learn about Dragon Age outside of the games, or at least the surface of the games that I play in, the less you have to talk about.
Okay. I'll let you figure out how much you want to listen to it. But
it's like I don't watch a lot of Fallout videos anymore that I used to watch.
Right, but so. to our listeners out there, if you do want to just know about, one-offs about specific topics, Dragon Age Lorecast does it, or DA Lorecast. Great. So, the worship of the old gods continued into Vinter Imperium, which the Chantry refers to as the first sin of humanity. These old gods included Dumat, the Dragon of Silence, Zazakel, the Dragon of Chaos, Toth, the Dragon of Fire, Andoral, the Dragon of Slaves, Urthimil, the Dragon of Beauty, Razakael, the Dragon of Mystery, and Lusakon, the Dragon of Night. These are the gods that centuries later, the head priests of the temples for these gods, also known as the Magisters Sidriel, though it's spelled Sidriel, so if I say that, I'm sorry, tried to reach when they entered the Fade with a lot of blood magic and a lot of scheming.
Gallons of blood magic.
So much blood magic. Those of the Chantry know this as the second sin. In fact, Corypheus was one of these magisters himself, a priest of Dumat, whose god promised him the power of the gods themselves, believing he would serve the old gods in person, in a golden city, in the Fade. The magisters found themselves in a blackened and corrupted area instead. The Chantry says that these magisters became the first darkspawn and were spat back onto the world. Corypheus accepted the darkness as part of his being, believing to have discovered something that was already there. Alternatively, for those of you who remember either the novel The Calling or Origins DLC Awakening, the Architect was also confirmed to be another one of the Magisters Sidriel and was the high priest to Urthimil. In fact, that's kind of why his name is the Architect. When the Magisters were forming this plot to go to the halls of the gods, gain their power, and become gods themselves, they tried to, first of all, they had a connection to their gods. Their gods would speak back to them. And literally, Dumat was the first one who instigated it with Corypheus's former human self and essentially said, yeah, you should do this. And the Architect was also told by Urthimil, is like, yes, go do this. Find us here.
I'm more blown away by the fact that I had completely forgotten about Awakening as a thing. And I'm kind of blown away that the Architect was not like a half-baked idea. They didn't go somewhere. Like, there actually is lore to...
There's a lot of lore to the Architect. And
my surface level understanding was, oh, that's a thing that happened, and not any of the reason why.
These Magisters had basically these secret titles, so they wouldn't be found out. So instead of going by his real name, the Architect, actually, his full title was the Architect of the Works of Beauty. Corypheus' title was, I think, the Conductor of the Chorus of Silence, something like that. So this language to kind of hide who they were, but also to show how important they really were going to be once they got there. And then, hence the epic line of Corypheus is like, I went to the throne to the Maker and I saw it empty.
Yes. It's an awesome scene.
So good. I wish they played that up more.
They have it's a pretty awesome scene. I think they played it up pretty well.
No, but then they didn't follow that thread in a way where it should have affected the Inquisitor or the followers of the Inquisitor more because of what it suggests, like that he had a chance to see the Maker. Now,
they do kind of brush it under the rug in the next scenes.
It was pointed out, actually, because I did listen to the DA Lorecast to brush up on some stuff, and it was pointed out to me that the Chantry believes this is why the Maker left. So not seeing the Maker in his throne means that you've already insulted him. You can easily write that off in Chantry belief. And then, like, you'd have to, for anybody else who believes them, like, it's not that crushing, but it is worth having a debate. And I would think at least there'd be some people who'd be like, it was already empty. So we know the old gods are real to the blights. It is the awakening of one of them that begins a blight. And the old god has to be killed by a Grey Warden in order to be killed for good. So, if for anyone doesn't know what the ritual is at the end of Dragon Age Origins, it's explained that a Grey Warden has to be the one to take the kill because then it absorbs the soul, and because two souls can't exist in the same body, it essentially fizzles both souls out. That's kind of how it's explained. And there are also other ways, of course. If you don't know, you don't know, and we'll probably talk about that in a minute. And considering the records of these high priests previously having direct conversations with their gods, I think it's fair to say that they did communicate with the humans of Thedas, that these old gods did speak to these priests. They gave them direction, like direct orders from their gods. I'm under the understanding that they saw them in their dragon forms, or at least to some extent. They knew what they looked like. They had constellations that represented them. They've maintained contact for centuries and worshipped them and would hear back from them.
This unfortunately is just bringing me back to Elder Scrolls, where you have the dragon priests who took orders from the dragons, and so
right.
It's like
it's a little different. It's a little different there because we don't think of these as genuine dragons because they're thought to be much more powerful. Obviously, they lead a blight, and blights really are terrors of war across the land. Like the Darkspawn are the troops that are going to help take over the mortal world, the material world. That is the plan.
Right.
And in fact, the first blight almost did it. So if it weren't for the Grey Wardens, Thedas would be nothing but Darkspawn. Now
think of the shops.
The shops. Now I get to the thesis of today's episode, which is something I actually wrote about on my Tumblr over 6 years ago, like I mentioned before. I was reminded of this theory by Redditor DJ Shepard, who posted a theory similar to what I mentioned on the Dragon Age subreddit.
Look at Sapphy citing sources.
They have been looking at the Dreadwolf art for clues as to what's going to happen in the next game.
BioWare fans are a singular bunch in some ways.
Oh, we want to know what's going on. It's a fantasy game that brings out this conspiratorial fun part, and it's a conspiracy that's fun to research.
Oh, no, like when they did that Mass Effect, like tiny little 25-second segment, people found hidden audio in the video and then decoded that. It's ridiculous what people will go through.
Way too much. We care way too much. Looking at the Elven Pantheon, or really the Evanurus who claim godhood, there are 8 of them in total. There are 7 old gods. If you take away Mythal, who Solus had said was murdered by her fellow Evanurus, you can see there'd be 7 gods left. Yeah. One other conspiratorial thing to think about that numbering is the fact that there's a theory by a Thedosian scholar about an 8th old god. It's based on the recorded constellations of Tevinter, where there is one for each old god and an 8th constellation for potential dragon god called Draconis.
That's a bit on the nose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's possible that this is a reference to the eighth god that none of the Magisters had ever direct contact to, but had heard about from the other old gods. Is it possible that maybe it's a reference to the slain Evanuris Mythal? Possibly. So the only reason I bring it up is because it was stricken from the record. Like, oh, we're not going to talk about it. So it could be something where there was a hunt for this old god, but they, especially if it's Mythal, and Mythal was murdered. So Mythal is not part of this old god situation by the time that humans are speaking with the old gods like Dumat and Toth. They, they might have seeked Draconis out and just never found Draconis and just moved on. Or thought it was a trick being played, or it was like a test of faith or something. But that's just me. That's just me spouting out a theory right now. Like, I don't even know.
Draconis is what's in the middle of that temple with all the shards in Inquisition.
No, it's what? Oh my gosh!
Someone's very angry that I just mentioned that temple with the shards.
Oh God! How dare you mention that fetch quest of doom? Okay, moving on. Let's now look to the story of the second sin, where the Magisters Sadriel were told by the old gods to cross the Fade and enter a golden city. We are told in legends of the Elven Pantheon that Fen'Harel had actually lured the gods away to a city for a truce with the Forgotten Ones. And there is text to suggest that that's the gods of the Elven Pantheon were locked away in a city. Elves believed that their gods are locked away in the Fade. What if the city is part of Solas's defenses? And while he slept, recovering from creating the Veil, the Evanuris figured out a way to influence a round-eared race of young beings who never knew what magic could be without a little nudge. We're talking about people who were used to shaping the world around them with the mere thought. Could they have figured out a way past the defenses built by Solas? I mean, possibly. Let's think about that. That would mean that every old god that is slain by Grey Warden is actually the soul, or the spirit, or maybe even just a fragment of the existence of an Evanuris. And are they even slain, or is something else happening? What if being an old god, which could feasibly a limit on the powers that they had before the Veil existed, is just a manifestation of the barriers that Solas created? So this is where my brain's been for the last 6 years, is thinking that the Evanuris are the old gods. The Evanuris are what are being fought by the Grey Wardens. And that's part of the reason why Solas in Inquisition is so mad at the Grey Wardens for even thinking that they should seek out and try to hunt and kill the other old gods. Maybe that's him realizing that his defenses be getting weaker and weaker.
Makes sense. I mean, that makes perfect sense if you're considering the power of these mages who became so powerful they became gods, and then fallen old gods.
They were never gods. Let's keep in mind, the Evanuris were never gods. They were just very powerful.
Revered as
gods, for sure.
So, over the course of centuries and ages and ages and ages and eons and all that stuff, I could totally see that being changed and him being completely a fish out of water eventually because he just slept through it all. I could see it.
And another thing about the Fade is that the Black City, which is the Chantry calls it the Black City because the Magisters blackened it. And then they use the Magisters as an excuse as to why the blight started happening. Because literally soon after they did that, the first blight starts. Now,
maybe it was just a decorating choice.
Tevinter, first of all, went through some stuff because they no longer heard the old gods.
Oops.
Yeah. Which I think is just lends itself to credence. Could you imagine if the Evanuris are these old gods and they trick the Magisters to do this, and the Magisters just undo this piece of magic they don't understand, and the Evanuris are like, bye. I don't need you anymore. I now need to get through the next defense. I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person to think of this theory independently from others, but when Redditor DJ Sepper pointed out that the Dreadwolf logo art references a shattering of barriers. So when you see when it says Dragon Age Dreadwolf on, the purple background has these rings. It's like 3 rings, and they're starting to like break.
Mm-hmm.
And they get more and more broken as they make more announcements or hints.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So someone's really paying attention to the artwork.
DJ Shepard is one of them, for sure. And then also made the Evan-Earth connection. I was more convinced that this is a viable theory. Part of the reason I didn't really talk about it before was that somebody made a good point previously. It's like, it would be really disappointing if everything was always elves all the time. Because, especially in Dragon Age Inquisition, we're told that the writers of the game thought that the main protagonist would be a human inquisitor. But it's so heavy in elf lore that you almost want to be an elf, specifically a woman elf who romances Solus, to really get the full picture of the lore. I know some of us refuse to go down that path, but there's a lot of elf lore that just gets drudged up. It's
dredged up and dropped in your lap as he takes away everything about your culture that you grew up with.
Well, you have to understand from his perspective. He saved his people. He went to sleep, and he woke up to see that once again he had to save his people because what he did had consequences. And that is a heavy albatross to carry around your neck, sir. So I also don't think that this necessarily means that the elves have to be everything, because we still have to keep, in fact, the Titans. The Titans, which were what the Evan-Earth were warring against on the material world. And we still don't know all the secrets about the Titans.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Spoilers again, obviously. We're doing a ton of spoilers, but
yeah,
is a Titan what we see in Descent?
Yes, that is exactly what we see in the Descent. And if you want to know more about that, I referenced that in that mini-sode between episodes 20 and 21.
Game in Mass Effect and in Dragon Age. They just literally had like deep lore where you literally have to go down deep into like the ocean, because I think it's called Leviathan.
Yes, it is Leviathan. Yeah, you're talking about.
And the Descent. It's just like we're gonna do this. This is the theme we're going with for these games. Like
somebody just really it's 2 different kinds of going deeper, so to speak. One's diving, and the other one is digging. Literally, like
but it's just funny that the giant lore drops both came from that.
Yeah. So I don't want to say that it's all about the elves. I do think the Titans are going to be more as well, especially if we're going to do something where the insinuation is we're going to restore things how they were before the Veil existed, which means that the Titan, if there's a Titan or 2 that still exist, it may have a grudge. The Evan-Earth come back, and they're like, we got one more of y'all to murder, and then we're done. And this Titan is like, no. Like, it's going to mean something.
Dragon Age 5, Titan Rising.
I think the connection of the old gods of humanity with the Evan-Earth is a valid theory. If confirmed when we play Dreadwolf, great. If not, it will be interesting to see what other clues come up that will help reveal the true origins. So that's like my big theory, is Now, I had heard, another thing that came up when I was listening to the DA Lorecast was that there was an idea that the Forgotten Ones were the old gods. And because I know that the Forgotten Ones were literally the ones that noped when the Evan-Earth started taking away people's rights thanks to magic, I don't think they are. I think they're, and very specifically, there is a fable of how the goddess of the hunt, Andriel, tried to hunt down the Forgotten Ones in the Void and started to go mad. And Mythal basically had to have her trick her to forget about the Void in order to stop pursuing them, because she was so fixated on her hunt.
Okay.
So that...
There's so many names. I'm trying to keep everything straight.
Okay.
Now I know how you feel when I drop all the Elder Scrolls stuff on you sometimes.
Yeah, I can't retain it all. But and then the last thing is that, so then what does that mean about Mythal? Because Mythal, we all found out in Dragon Age Inquisition, you didn't even need a DLC for this, that Mythal is Flemeth. Mythal is the Witch of the Wilds.
Now, see, I also thought that Flemeth was just like a reincarnation, but was she Mythal?
She is, in theory, a reincarnation of sorts.
Okay, maybe that's why I got confused with Solus then.
That's exactly what it... And that's what I was going to correct, is that Mythal does not have the same body she had previously. Now, Solus literally did the thing... He did a Rip Van Winkle because he enacted a power so big that he needed centuries of sleep in order to recover. Eons, even.
He looks good for it, though.
I mean,
shame
lost
about
Doll's
his
hair.
hair falling out.
Yeah. Whereas Mythal...
Just body hops?
Body hops. And then you have that scene at the end of Inquisition, the end of the regular game.
That's the end of the credits, right? It's
the end of credits. Yeah. Where there's that exchange with Solus and Mythal. And it seems that he takes something from her and renders her to stone, if I remember correctly. But essentially, like, it's this idea that he's the real threat. One, I still think Mythal's a threat. She
Threat, though? I thought Mythal was, quote, one of the better ones.
So Mythal specifically states, so what happens is, especially, and this is, like, when you see Mythal, and Morrigan is trying to get Kieran away from Mythal, because this is great little story of Morrigan felt like she was used as a tool, and now that she's a mother, she refuses to let her son be in that cycle of abuse. And...
Well, that's good.
And Mythal essentially has the one last thing that she needs from Morrigan, which is the old soul that she asked Morrigan to get 10 years prior. And that's in Kieran. And so she has to get that. And that's when she explains it. And she talks about that there was a moment when she was a woman, like, alone, scorned in a field, and suddenly she felt this power. And she mentions this, like, need for revenge or vengeance. I have to rewatch the scene. But it's not about justice. It's about revenge. So there's a couple of things. I got really conspiratorial talking about this on the Discord. I literally, like, asked on the Daily Lorecast Discord. I was like, guys, just tell me if I'm just being dumb. But what if Mythal's not really Mythal? She's just saying she is, that she's actually Elgernon because vengeance. And the good point was brought up of, like, well, they're not really gods. Let's think of it. They just had domains because they pretended to be gods. So she's a real person who has real feelings and may now just want to be on revenge because these people killed her, like murdered her. And she just wants to feel, she wants to enact her vengeance on them. So I kind of let go of that theory, but I mean, she has this old soul, and I'm assuming that's what Solus took, and then you could have to guess to see, can you do the little, puzzle game cross of, like, okay, so which old god is an Evanurus, of which Evanurus, da 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 da. So, which I haven't done that. I'm sure other people have, but I have not done that. I still think Mythal is a factor, or Flemeth, Witch of the Wilds, however you want to speak of her at this point.
I want her to be, just because I want Kate Mulgrew to voice more.
Because Kate Mulgrew is amazing. And I don't know what's going to happen with that. Yeah, we're going to find out. So this is I shouldn't say this is Sapphy's theory about what's going to be coming up in Dragon Age Dreadwolf, aka Dad. So,
which is funny because we already did a theory of what's going to be coming up, and that ended up being about the Leviathan and
not Leviathan, Mythal and the Titans.
Sorry, yeah, I got my BioWare confused.
So they're, another reason I think the Titans are going to come up is because Red Lyrium. If we remember what happened, if you do the side quest with Varric and Bianca, who the crossbow is named after, Bianca, not the crossbow didn't suddenly...
The person Bianca.
The person Bianca, yeah.
The dwarf Bianca.
Yes. She's still a person. She's a dwarf person.
I'm just putting dwarf on there as a qualifier.
she mentions that it seems to be organic and blighted. And then if you do the descent, you essentially get the suggestion that lyrium is the blood of Titans. So there's I have a lot of concerns about this, especially considering the only way that you can ever enhance magic is blood, so all magic enhancement is blood magic.
Yes. We talked about that in the previous episode we did on Dragon
So you have that. And that means if it's organic, that means it can be blighted. So you have a blighted Titan.
I told you, Dragon Age 5, Titan Rising.
And that's the... And what if... does that refer to the horrific thing that the elves think that the Evernorse unleashed? And that would then go back to Venture being right about, like, we didn't start to darkspawn. We just happened upon it, and then it went crazy.
Yeah, we're going to get to the end of Dragon Age Dreadwolf. We're going to dispatch of Solus one way or another. The next DLC will hint to something else.
I am sorry, guys. I think Dragon Age... I think that's totally a red herring. He's not the main bad guy. There's no way. There's just... I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But, I mean, let's think about what really happened in all of the 3 games. Like, so, Dragon Age Origins... we gotta fight the Blight. We're gonna get this Archdemon. You know who the real villain is in that whole game? Loghain. It's all, like, political BS you have to do because he's the reason you're in the problem you're in. Dragon Age 2. You're trying to figure out the Mage and Templars issue. You know who the real enemy in that is? Secretly? Corypheus, actually. Because you get the DLC that explains that he's kind of finagling with the Grey Wardens. And that becomes your segue into Dragon Age 3. And then you're like, okay, we're really going to fight Corypheus now. You know who the real villain is in Dragon Age 3? Solus!
Okay, so Dragon Age 4, we take out Solus at some point. There's some other, some Tevinter or something or other that's going to be involved, or they'll... something, and then the last thing is going to be the last DLC will be about a Titan being corrupted, and then that's going to be Dragon Age 5. I'll put $5 on it.
It'll be... You want to put $5 that it's a Titan? Dragon Age 5 Titan's Call. Dragon Age 5, you got titaned.
It could even be Titanfall. That's an EA property too, isn't it?
Titan's Fall. I think that could confuse with some other properties that I know of. So
it could. That's why it'd be funny.
Okay, I think I've gone on enough. There's just so much that's going on in my head about me thinking about what could happen. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And
when is Dragon Age Day?
December 4th.
December 4th. Okay. Oh, D-A.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's the unofficial Dragon Age Day. I will try to share where I can. A lot of charity streams and stuff happen then, and we'll have plenty of friends participating in that. So we'll try to share that as well. This is also where I'm going to announce that I plan on doing a playthrough of all the Dragon Age games, and patrons will be able to vote on some of the bigger decisions throughout those games, including who to romance, who to have an ally during the big decisions, and all of that fun stuff. And
just makes me want to get back to Lorik.
Yes.
Now that I hopefully maybe
you made me jealous. Yeah, you made me jealous of Lorik. So I have less mod issues with Dragon Age. So
this is true. I'm hoping that I can play Lorik again now, but
so patrons will be able to see all that first and make decisions on it, and then a month after it's released, it will be released to the public. I will not be playing it in time to probably get to play Dragon Age Dreadwolf when it releases. I will probably play Dragon Age Dreadwolf separately from that, have my own fun playthrough first, and then do the one that's based on what the choices are for the fans.
Right.
Because I don't think I'm going to finish all 3 of the games in time. It's just not going to happen. I do not have the time. So if you want to become a patron and be a part of that, please join us, and we'll keep you in the loop. In the meantime, though, we will do our live stream of Dragon Age. I was thinking we would go back to Inquisition.
Have we played Inquisition for... I don't think we played Inquisition
We did
yet.
for Varric.
We did. I don't know if we have that save file anymore.
Well, then you're going to have to catch up on some stuff because we're not going to be doing the beginning of a Dragon Age game.
No.
We're not going to be doing that. So we'll figure that out. But we'll do that, and Mystic will be behind the seat there. And then on our alternate Thursdays, we're still doing a really bad voice acting.
In Skies of Arcadia.
In Skies of Arcadia. And oh boy, do I love doing that.
Hope to see you there. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.